Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unlocked, where we talk about unlocking the potential of you, the people you work with, and the people you do life with. At the time of this recording, I'm offering all of you, yes, my lovely listeners, a free 15-minute communication coaching call. You come with some kind of communication problem, and I give you a solution. My calendar link is in the show notes, so check that out. People are going to say, oh, I don't like change, and people don't like change, and we don't like change, and change is hard, and change is all these things. Now, there's some truth in all of those statements. But what I will say is that my guest on the show today, Karen, is going to introduce you to how to make change a healthier process for everybody. We don't always have to like change, but we can actually move through it and not fear, I guess, the outcomes of change or the process because it was so grueling and traumatizing last time. We can go, I don't really like change, but you know what? We do change pretty well. It's going to end up being okay. We can have that type of attitude as well. Karen Ball is the senior fellow at Prosci. For over 40 years, she's helped individuals and organizations implement changes and achieve benefits not thought possible. Karen often shares her passion for all things ADKAR, and that acronym, ADKAR, we're going to talk about that in the show. So you're going to understand ADKAR, what that stands for, and actually that process for implementing change. She does this through podcasts and webinars and speaking engagements, and she does it through this new book. It's a rewritten version of a book that has been around for a while, but she adds her own spin and her touch onto that book. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. So you ready to talk about change? Well, I am. So here we go. Here we go, Karen. We're going to talk about some fun stuff today.
We are. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I had another one of your friends on about 3 years ago, and now I get to talk to you. That episode with Tim was awesome, and people should go back and listen to that episode. And Tim Creasy, and his brain is just fantastic. So
his brain is one of those, you just wonder what's going on in there, right?
Yeah, totally.
You can see the words coming out and you can see the expressions, but I would love to have a front row seat to the connections that are taking place.
I know. And I was sitting there interviewing Tim, and I'm going, am I connecting? Like, am I saying the right things right now to get the right stuff out of it? I don't know. I was just kind of second guessing myself because I think his presence just demands this intellectual capacity to like engage, So it was really fun interviewing him. It was really fun. So I get to hang out with you now, and we're going to talk. I want to talk about this change thing because this is a hot topic. I'm speaking on this a lot around the country right now. And as you are, I'm sure as well, and other colleagues that you have, but you specialize in this whole change thing.
Yeah, I do. I have, I've got some fun background stories too on my career transitions from, I almost said transgression. I think that was a slip.
A little slip there.
Yeah. The transition from where I started my career in the information technology space. So I was out helping organizations implement pretty complex, large scale IT changes. That were platform level changes, transformational changes. And I just kept observing it was one of those feelings where I really cared a lot about the people who were impacted by these changes. And we're just coming in and implementing technology and wondering why the benefits weren't being realized. So I started pulling the covers back on the concepts of the focus on adoption versus installation, right? Instead of installing changes, let's focus on the adoption of changes. So that's when my attention transitioned from the technical side of what the change was happening to the people who were impacted. And how do we support, equip, and enable each of those people to have a successful transition so the investment that organizations are making are going to be realized. There's ROI on the other side of the table.
Can I ask you about that adoption versus installation thing you just said.
Yeah.
Um, so do you see a lot of organizations look to, what do you mean by install something versus like adopt something? Expand on that for me.
Yeah, let me just give you a quick example. So imagine that you're sitting in the office environment, and over the holiday breaks, your organization went around and installed automated systems in the conference rooms to shut the lighting down once there's no activity in the room. Of course, organizations do that for cost savings and energy efficiencies and sustainability. And when you think about that particular change, if you are someone who's impacted by that change, you walk into the conference room and, after a certain amount of time, the lights shut down when there's inactivity. And so there's an installation of a change, the installation of the automated lighting systems, but there's very little around adoption. So there's really not much I need to do other than, of course, this happens to all of us. We're sitting there quietly at our desktop and the lights go out. So we have to wave our arms to get the lights to re-engage. So the installed change is the automated lighting systems for the business reasons that we install them. The adoption story is rather insignificant. Partner that with another scenario that you now go to the cafe. And of course, now I'm in the assumption that we're in an in-person work environment, which is a whole other story that we can start heading down that path. But I walk into the cafe, and in addition, over the holiday breaks and the time away, they installed a whole system for helping us sort our trash. So we've got our recycle, and we've got our compost, and we've got our place where we put our utensils that need to be washed. And I'm standing there with my tray after lunch and wondering what to do, right? All of a sudden, there's so many things I need to be aware of, and I have to sort my things. And next thing you know, the adoption story is great because I actually have to change attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So there's two examples of the installation of a change versus the adoption of a change. One is heavily dependent on people changing the way that they do things, and the other is not. So that's an example of installation versus adoption. Hopefully that's helpful.
Is is installation, installation is just part of it, I would assume. Is there is there a negative consequence to overemphasizing the installation and not enough of the adoption? And do we always need to be thinking about adoption, or as with the conference light thing, or is it okay just to worry about installation, not really put so much emphasis on adoption? Or like, where do we allocate our resources?
Yeah, great question. I think, and this is one of those key questions that, at Prosci, we invite our customers to consider for any change is what percentage of the benefits of a particular change depend on adoption and usage. So, the simple examples of the conference room lighting situation or the sorts in the cafe. But think about it from the process improvement or installing a new technology or bringing an AI agent into our customer service platform. Each one of those, we can ask that question: what percentage of the benefits depend on adoption and usage? And the next question, of course, is how much are we investing in the people side of that change to realize that benefit? So that's where change management as a discipline really steps in when we are heavily dependent on people changing the way they do things. And it could be mindsets, attitudes, and beliefs. It could be, process behavior, systems behaviors, roles change, compensation structures change, locations change. There's lots of different things that are changing. And then the question is, how much of the benefits depend on people coming alongside that change, knowing how, being able, implementing the required behaviors and changes that are necessary to realize the outcomes and the results. Because organizations change for a reason. There's a reason why things are different. There's a reason why we upgrade that system, or they implement the tool, or they change the process, or they redefine role clarity. All the things around what's changing. And then we have to think about who has to do something differently. And that's where change management comes in.
Okay. And what is the thing right now that you feel is like the big change that's you're addressing all the time? It's like, the thing right now that you think would resonate with a lot of people out there?
A lot of the changes are still technology. And that's certainly not going to change. The digital transformation story that has been part of our work environments continues. And of course, what we're digitally transforming to, right? The introduction of AI is certainly one that's top of mind and top of priority for lots of organizations, trying to figure out what in fact is the technology. What does it do for us? How does it help us, serve our customers, compete more effectively, reach new markets, all of the things around the strategy execution and strategy implementation that we're all focused on. So a lot of changes are still digital transformations. We have an awful lot of organizations that continue, for example, their ERP journeys, their enterprise resource planning and resource management journeys, whether it's next gen, what they've implemented already, or it's the acquisition of multiple companies. I worked with an organization just a couple of weeks ago who had recently acquired a name brand organization that we all know and love. And there was 1,000 people that were going to have to be integrated into that organization across all of their systems and tools, including what they considered to be not a really successful ERP implementation. So they were trying to rethink that. So a lot of it is that, but I think there's also, coming into how we're thinking about organization structures and design and how we support people. There's an awful lot of focus on the people side of things, whether it's from a change perspective or it's emotional intelligence or decision quality. There's just an awful lot of human-centric changes that are taking place in our organizations, which is obviously great to see.
Implementing the AI digital transformation stuff with the human stuff that you're talking about. I mean, we're focused a lot on the technology, as you said, and as is probably something that will be, what we do in the normal everyday workspace into the future. But we can't ignore the human side of what this all entails. How are you advising companies that are going, thinking about AI, thinking about integrating the idea of AI into their workplace? How are you, what are you talking to them about and how they implement that and keeping the human side of what they do?
Yeah, and AI is no different than any other change. We bring that one forward because, again, it's top of mind and top of priority for a lot of organizations. But many organizations are just trying to figure out what it is and how it helps them. How does it help them do what they're trying to do? How does it help them improve efficiencies and effectiveness and all of the business drivers? But with that, as any change, right, there's a people side who has to do their jobs differently. So whether it's ERP or AI or customer relationship management or, you name it, right, in the medical systems, right, when we made the major transformations to electronic medical records, for example, what was the impact on all the people in these systems? Who has to do their jobs differently? How are they impacted? What is the degree of impact? And then how do we engage with people to make sure they make a successful change journey? And one of the things that we talk about at Prosci, change is individual first before it's organizational. The unit of change is a person. So depending on, what is the change or the nature of the change that we're introducing, who are those individuals who are impacted and how are we going to help them through those individual change journeys? There's also the leadership story inside of all of that, Scott, too, is we look at people managers or we look at organizational leaders. How do we introduce for them a new way of thinking about, a new way of considering change as a journey? How we support those people who are impacted to go through a successful transition so that the organization realizes the benefits. At the end of the day, it's the change outcomes that produce the benefits, as we talked about the difference between installation and adoption. Adoption is when we realize the benefits, not just by installing something.
Okay, I think that organizations, they think about, I'm going to bring about this change, and they think about organizational change. And I don't know if you're seeing this, but I think their first thing is, I'm going to go organizational, and then we'll figure out how to bring the people along after that. I mean, is that what you're finding, or are people like, no, we're working on the individual first, and that will bring the organizational?
Yeah, maybe this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg. It depends on who you're talking to. Senior leaders of organizations, we have them in their places because they're the vision setters, right? They're the ones that are articulating the desired future state. So sometimes that's aspirational future state. Sometimes it's very specific. But organizations think more holistically first. I need to drive this particular change. I need to have this particular implementation. Again, we can come up with all kinds of examples. I've got, one customer who is implementing, let's just think of something entirely different, autonomous mining machines for a mine in Brazil. So, that's not a change that you would ordinarily think of, but it was something that particular organization, that mining organization, needed to implement to stay relevant for lots of different reasons. And what a significant impact to go into autonomous mining machines. So they're thinking more broadly about, what the future state looks like. And then as we start imagining bringing that change to life, then taking it back to who are all of the groups that are impacted? Who are the individuals in those groups? What does it look like for somebody who is on the ground in that in that particular scenario versus somebody who's in the corporate environment, who's managing, the corporate aspects of the business. So, it's a combination of things. Organizations are continuously thinking about the future state. Where are we going? And sometimes this is strategy execution. Sometimes it's operational improvement. Sometimes it's reactive. Sometimes it's proactive. There's lots of reasons that we implement changes inside of our organizational contexts. But if we don't go eventually, someone eventually needs to get to the point of who are all of the individuals who have to do something differently. And what is it that they have to do? Is it a new process? Is it a new system? Is it a new tool? Is it new, like I said before, reporting structures, mindsets, attitudes, and beliefs? So without the individual focus and understanding each individual impacted by change and how we're going to support them through that, then the organizational outcomes are just not going to be realized. At Prosci, we talk about that in terms of the Swiss cheese future state. So we've got this imagined, aspirational future state, 30 days from now, 3 years from now, 30 years from now, whatever the planning horizon is. And without all those individual transitions, there's just a lot of holes as people don't understand why and why now and what if we don't and haven't chosen to and don't know how to and aren't able to. And what I'm basically taking you through is the individual change model that's represented in the acronym ADKAR. So without the focus on understanding that individuals are the unit of change, and what we need to do as organizations is scale individual change to the level of change impact. One person, 10 people, 50 people, hundreds of people, thousands of people. Worked with one organization that's a major global pharmaceutical company that was implementing some digital transformation journey steps that impacted 50,000 people with 5,000 migrations from, old systems in tech to new systems in tech. And they architected the entire journey for those 50,000 people through the lens of change as individual first before it's organizational.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think it's natural to think organizational, especially if you're one of the C-suite individuals up there talking about broad things, looking out into the vast future of what this is going to implement, and then backing into, okay, now we got to figure out how to get these people on board with this thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit of time travel, right? We're living and thinking in the future, but then we have to come back to the current state and collect everybody and bring them to the future state with us. And, it's a very, intentional and structured process to be able to do that and to be able to sit in both places in the desired future state and then step back to where people are in their own individual current states to help them through that process.
Exactly. And that's what I talk to people about quite a bit, because I'll hear oftentimes, and I want to hear what you think about this phrase of, oh, people don't like change. People don't like change. What do you think about that statement?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers in that. As humans, right? If we go to the human animal that we all are, Change oftentimes feels threatening. And so you get into you can talk to our neuroscience friends who spend time thinking about the human response to change, right? That we are wired for consistency, and it takes less brain energy once you create habit. And it's, you unlock habit and then you have to reinstall, it just takes energy to change. But people don't like change that they don't understand, or they don't have any idea of why it's being implemented or how it impacts them. So the intent around the discipline of change management, even more broadly, is to help people understand that, of course, we can't say we don't like change. Everything changes every day, all the time. But it's what is our natural response to change versus how is change introduced to us? And it can be personal, it can be professional. We've studied, and I'll spend some more time talking about ADKAR as we've, introduced it, just for, the model, right, is an acronym, and I can share the details behind that. But, there's a story that, someone who as an adult was learning to swim. He was in his 30s, and his wife said, now that I'm expecting our first child, don't you think that you should develop the skills of swimming? I think that's something that's an important life skill as a parent. And so he went through the whole change journey. And, at first he said, I really had no interest in learning to swim. He had had a traumatic experience as a child, and kind of set off that skill as something that, wasn't necessary. So again, it depends on what is the driver for the change. Why are we being asked to change? And then, helping us understand the brain process naturally, but also the psychological process of change. And people like change when the change is welcome, it solves problems, it identifies opportunities, they understand how they're going to be supported through the change and what success looks like on the other side. It's when we introduce change without all those factors that we get the natural resistance barriers. I talk about people reaching into a bag and putting up a resistance flag. It's like sending a flag up the pole that says, no, I don't like this change, but only because they don't really know what it is or why it's happening. Not necessarily that they don't like the change. They just don't have what they need to be successful.
Yeah, I'll push back on people sometimes. I'll say, I mean, there are going to be certain people that aren't totally on board with the fact that payphones don't exist anymore, or that we moved over to like mobile phones. I'm sure the payphone companies, whether it's AT&T or Bell South or whoever, that's from the South, we're not too happy about some of that stuff. AT&T probably thinks fine. Bell South probably isn't. But when you think about that change, it actually benefited commerce and all kinds of things for us as individuals and we probably welcome that change. But it's probably scary for some. We also love to change our hair, and we love to, or else we would still dress like we did 20, 30 years ago. There's change that we just go through. And I think we like change the way we like it. I'm cool with change as long as it's, like you said, it makes sense to me. I know it's in it for me. I feel like I'm not being bulldozed into the change. I feel like I'm being brought along into the change. I think the way that we implement change is probably has a big, a big weight on how we adopt the change. I will also add this, that I feel like people have been traumatized by change in the past. So now when change happens, they're way guarded. So I don't know. Do you see that happening in your line of work?
Yeah, and again, we can do personal versus professional. We undergo changes in our personal lives all of the time. It's just the natural cycles in our lives to go through lots of different changes. Of course, my adult children, going through their cycles of life now, I can observe and watch that from a completely different lens than when I was parenting them at home. Professionally the same. And as organizations, change is a natural inclination. If we don't change, we're going to become irrelevant and get left behind somewhere in the process. I think the biggest challenge, Scott, is that understanding that change is a process. It's not an event. It's a process. And the process of change has very clearly defined steps and stages. And once we understand that, we speak differently, we communicate differently, we engage differently, we bring people into the change process more intentionally. And we can do that for ourselves as well as for others. I think one of the most insightful skill sets that as leaders of organizations is once we understand that change is a process and that there is a structured and repeatable and modeled way that we go through change, once I get that insight, I can be much more supportive because I also have to be responsible for my own response to change. So once I am responsible to my own influence by the change that's happening, then I know I can support and equip others more effectively. At Prosci, we talk about this in terms of putting on your own oxygen mask before helping others. So it raises our intelligence emotionally and just focus on what are the stages and steps? Where are my team in this process? Where are the individuals on my team in this process? Where is my son, my daughter, my husband in this process? Again, it's personal and professional because it's individual. And that individual change process is an unlocking mechanism, both intellectually, understanding that process, but also in our behaviors and actions. So once we know what the process is, I like to use two words, sense making and wayfinding. And once we have a way to make sense of change and the individual change process, then that naturally gives us a way to find our path through it successfully, efficiently, effectively. And organizations, for example, that have taken on building change as a muscle, getting really good at change, what happens is change capacity goes up just naturally because people believe we're good at this. We've got this. There's a lot happening and we're good at this. So change is a process, change is individual. There is an individual change process. All of those things are unlocks that we can observe more effectively. We can look retrospective. We can look at failed changes in our past and go, I see exactly where it failed, right? Once we've got that model and that lens.
Really, really good. All right, let's talk about bringing people along. You've introduced this ADKAR framework, the acronym, and just what you were saying here. If we can build a good model for change, we'll increase our change capacity. I love that, right? It doesn't have to be here we go again with change. Oh, here we go again with change. Oh, like you work out one time, your muscles are going to be really sore. Then you work out a month later, one time, your muscles are going to be really sore. So it hurts every time you work out. But if we can build consistency along that workout in a system and a framework, our muscles aren't as sore and we can actually walk, the next day. Same thing with change. So introduce us to the ADKAR framework and how that helps an organization actually build in that good process.
Yeah, and it is a model, and I'll be happy to describe. And then go back to your exercise example. Here's the other challenge: is you worked out once and you were sore, and you worked out twice, and a month later, and you were sore, and now you're like, oh, working out equals being sore. So you build a history that tells you that this is hard. So we've got to rewire that history with some successes in order to set ourselves up for people going, yeah, it's okay. We're okay because we've got this. So organizations actually, many of them live in a history of failed change, and it's like a ball and chain that they drag along with them. So we want to break that chain and start doing things differently. So just to give you an idea, ADKAR is an acronym, and it is a core part of the Prosci methodology and the Prosci way of doing things. And let me just tell you a little bit about the background. But as an acronym, it stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So each one of those is an outcome. It's an outcome of the activities that we conduct to help people go through the individual change process. So that's the individual change process, whether we're Graham learning to swim, or we're the, mining company in Brazil trying to introduce those autonomous mining machines, or we're that pharmaceutical company introducing change journeys for 50,000 impacted employees. So ADKAR was discovered, and I like to use the word discovered because it was a pursuit of understanding. And the critical question, and this was the critical question that Jeff Hyatt, who's Prosci's founder, in the late 1990s, he worked for Bell Laboratories. And he was, part of large scale, he's an engineer, part of large scale changes, systems, process, organizational changes. And he was just observing lots of failed changes and some successes. And he wanted to discover what were the patterns of those successful changes. So he left Bell Laboratories soon after that and started this pursuit of research and looked at change patterns across 4 years with over 700 companies. And he discovered that it wasn't what was changing that was causing the most difficulty. It was the people side of the change and what the change process is at the individual level. Because again, remember, change is individual first before it's organizational. And he developed the ADKAR model, and it was his way to articulate the change journey. Each of those are building blocks. Each of them are in sequence necessary for someone to successfully find their way through a change. So for Graham, going through the swimming story, he had awareness. His wife was giving him a really strong awareness of why she felt that change was necessary. And he had to decide. The desire is all about that personal decision that we make, deciding to the motivators, whether it's individual or organizational. And then he started down the path of knowledge. And he said he signed up for swim lessons at like 2 or 3 different places because he was, a super achiever. And he thought, well, if I just learn more, I'll be able to swim sooner, and discovered that knowledge to ability gap was something that he couldn't shortcut. He had to do the work and get in the pool and get those, 15-year-old instructors teaching, a 30-something person how to swim. Then, of course, he talks about the reinforcement of being able to take his wife eventually to the swimming center and watch him get in the pool and swim. And he brought that story forward to, 2 children now, and going to lakes and oceans and being able to feel comfortable and confident around water with his children. So the ADKAR journey is, personal, it's professional, it's individual, and then we scale it to organizational. But what Jeff was discovering was that is a universal process of change. So as organizations, it gives us the guidance to know what to communicate, who should communicate, what we should say, how we engage with people, how we support them through that awareness, desire, knowledge to ability, and then reinforcement. And it becomes the central component of, an incredibly effective change journey. The 50,000 person pharmaceutical company said they architected the change journeys for 50,000 people through the lens of ADKAR and found their way to the end of that digital transformation with many, many, many successes under their belts. So that's what ADKAR is. It was a discovery. It's been around since the late 1990s. And what we see is it's just increasing in influence and impact because it works and it's simple and people connect to it.
Do you think any of those 5 stages is more important than the other? I know you're going to say they're all important. I get it. But is there one that when it's not done well will break the whole thing?
You know what? Gosh, that's a great way. And it's hard not to say they're all important, but it is a sequential model. So, you need to make your way through each of those ADKAR elements. And sometimes they happen almost instantaneously. Sometimes I don't need, there's actually an ADKAR journey happening in my mind, but it just happens instantaneously. There's 2 places that organizations often get stuck. Is under desire, because people need to choose to participate. We can inform and influence desire, but we can't make someone. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't consequences. So if my organization is implementing, an ERP system and I'm sitting in an impacted group and I need to learn to use this tool to be able to do my job effectively, then I can say, I choose not to participate. There's consequences. I'm certainly not going to continue to be in that job. The organization will find other places for me to contribute or find me places not to contribute. So desire is hard because we need to focus on both individual motivators and organizational motivators. Sometimes it's not enough to say, what's in it for the organization, but something, what's in it for me. I was working with one organization, and there was a woman who was actively involved in a large scale change. It was a big SharePoint implementation that I was working on for a client. And a woman who was actively involved in all the planning all of a sudden started stepping away. And I knew something, I could tell something was different. And, I sat down with her one day and I said, what's going on here, Sharon? I really see that you're stepping away from what we're trying to accomplish. And she said, I just had this realization that I've been the subject matter expert on our old process for 6 years. And I really like being the subject matter expert. And I see that getting stripped away. And I'm not sure I see myself in this new future state. And so we sat down together and, I encouraged her to talk to her people manager. And I said, well, if you like being the subject matter expert, step into that role again. It just might mean that you need to say, I need more training. I want to go first. Help me help others. Can I do train the trainer? What can I do to continue in that? So her desire, the motivators were something she kind of have had to dig into. But if I hadn't have had that conversation with her, I think the organization might have lost a really, really important resource on the team. So desire is hard, but I think reinforcement is one that we forget as well. It is the ADKAR model, not the ADKA model. So we need to think about what are the reinforcing and sustaining mechanisms for the change. And it can be, and this is an interesting one. I worked with one organization that the compensation program reinforced old behaviors. So nobody sat down and figured out how are we going to support the reinforcement of the structural mechanism of compensation to make sure people make the transition and stay in that. Otherwise, people are going back naturally to the current state that they knew because that's where their compensation structure was targeting. So I think desire and reinforcement are ones that take some more intentionality. Knowledge, knowledge is where, we send people to training, right? Send them an email on Monday for a training on Tuesday for a go live on Wednesday. That's not change management, right? We need some time to get the awareness and why is it happening? Why now? And get that decision. I understand why, so that we can get into the others. But organizations also sometimes miss the K to A. Knowing how and being able are two different things. So there can be barriers at each one of them. And it's just the structure and intent that we put behind the activities and actions that we take by the right people at the right time to help people through those ADKAR journeys.
Very cool. And y'all had a book on this, obviously. When you have a framework like that, you write a book about it. And you just had a big role in not revising the process, but kind of going back in and adding some stories and your touch on the new book. So the old book, the old new version. Well,
old, new, old. Yeah. What are we going to say? Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, Jeff Hyatt wrote a book in 2006. So he's, the author, the founder of Prosci, the discoverer of the Prosci ADKAR model. And he wrote a book in 2006 that was the first introduction to the ADKAR model. So, fast forward, almost 20 years later, what we have in our body of knowledge in regards to ADKAR is, an additional 18, 20 years of the promise of ADKAR through research, proof of ADKAR through application, and all those stories. As you mentioned, the book includes over 50 individuals who share their personal and professional ADKAR stories. The story about Graham, for example, learning to swim is in the book, and Anna Boleyn, who's getting her son to eat broccoli, to eat more nutritious foods through the lens of ADKAR, but all the way up to what we've described in terms of those big organizational changes. So the promise, the proof, and the practice. So much of what we've learned in the last 20 years is the steps and the actions, and change management as a discipline has become much more mature. And we have individuals in our organizations that are change practitioners who are working alongside those project teams to focus not just on what's changing, but who's changing and how they're impacted. So it was an opportunity for us to bring forward, the additional research, the additional stories, the additional practice aspects in order to tell the big story around ADKAR.
Beautiful. Thank you for talking about this. This is so relevant. And, the only thing guaranteed in life, Karen, that's it. So we've heard the phrase, and that is why I think this is so relevant. You're always going to have a job. So congratulations on getting into an industry where you always have a job. So this is fantastic. Thanks for writing the book. Thanks for spreading the knowledge and helping my audience grasp some of these concepts a little bit better. I think that's the idea is, can we create a good system, a good model that brings about, not that everybody has to like change all the time, but that we move through it in a way that creates less trauma and actually healthy environments to where we are the type of organization that does change well, instead of we are the type of organization that change is grueling every time we do it.
Absolutely. And people are going to find their way to places that do it well. And again, it's the right way to treat our people. It's the right way to responsibly manage our organizations. Again, my 2 key words, sense making. We can make sense of the change process, and we can find our way through it. Scan and act. And when we do that through the lens of ADKAR in a more structured and intentional way, the benefits are there. Absolutely. So many benefits that can be realized. And it's the unlock, I think, that all of us were hoping for and maybe just haven't explored yet. And we'd love for people to think about that more intentionally.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Good luck with the book.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Scott.
Many of you out there probably think we've got to bring about change. We got to bring about change. So how are we going to make the change happen? How? When we start to think about why we're doing this change and thinking about first of all, we've got this problem, which probably brings about the idea that we need this change. How do we increase the desire aspect? How do we create this idea of, okay, how do we help it make sense to those who are out there? How do we create big picture ideas for those that want the big picture? How are we going to bring the data and the resources and the things needed in order to implement change in a way that helps people want to move along with the change, not resist the change? Because if the change has to happen, the change has to happen. And wouldn't it be a lot nicer to have the change happen with people that aren't resisting the change? Yeah, that would be awesome. Individuals first. So are you thinking about the individual first in this change process? That will help you. Change can be threatening to some people. So let's think about, how do we bring about that change as a process? It's not an event, it's a process. And I like that framework too, that idea. Let's make sense so that we can find a way. Make sense so we can find a way. And as we think more about building a healthy process so we can increase our change capacity, you will be able to implement this stuff better in the future. So go check out that book. Grateful for Karen for being on the show. Thank you. If you want to find out more information about me or check out the show notes where there's going to be more information and links to the things referenced in this episode, visit skotwaldron.com. And lastly, I'm asking for a little bit of love, just a little bit. So please take a moment, follow, rate the show. The algorithms like that. It helps me get the word out. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And until next time, stay unlocked.